If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hello and welcome to If This Goes On, Don't Panic. Today we have a very award-nominated writer, Thomas Haw. Kat, how are things going?
Things are going okay. It is getting towards the end of the year, which is nice. Always kind of reflective season to figure out what this year held and what next year looks like.
Yeah. I have not quite mentally got there yet, but in like 2 weeks, it'll hit me like, oh, everyone else is doing that. I should probably start thinking about these things. Right?
Well,
what are you reflecting on?
Oh, I am reflecting because I'm off to Spain in 8 days, or actually no longer 8 days, 4 days. I'm going to Spain for 10 days.
Oh, so jealous. Now, are you staying at that cool castle again, or are you going somewhere else?
No. This time, well, I'm going with my business partner, the one that runs the live workshop with me, and we are scouting in Valencia and Alicante this time, but also doing a certain amount of pleasure traveling as well.
Yeah. When you say scouting, what do you mean by that? What are you scouting for?
To see if that's our place where we want to do the workshop sometime in future years, because we're thinking of doing it in Spain in 2027.
Excellent. That sounds so cool.
How about you? What's up and new?
Oh gosh, not much, just kind of doing the day-to-day thing. We did have a big layoff at work, and we were talking about this before the call, which kind of sent me spinning a little bit. At this point, I have personally been laid off, I think 5 times now.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah. You accumulate those in life, right?
Yes, you do, especially if you're a corporate person in this day and age.
Yeah.
But I did not get laid off this time, thankfully. And yeah, I'm so happy. I mean, I'm not happy for the people that got laid off, but I'm happy to be able to still, pay my bills.
Yeah, certainly.
I'm curious. Did you hear that we were Hugo longlisted? I know Diane and I had talked about it, but I didn't know if you'd saw that.
You mentioned it. I at the when we're at Worldcon, which is awesome, and I certainly urge everyone who's listening that if they want to hear us really just totally lose our shit, feel free to pump us up further.
Right. I mean, that's the second time. I'm excited. So
yeah, no, that's really cool.
Yeah. Still hoping for that short list, but
Yeah. Well, we've been around. How many years have we been doing this now? We've been doing it since
coming up on 6, I think.
Yeah, 6 years.
I think our first episode, we recorded it in 2019 and it came out in 2020.
Yeah. Yes, because we did it. You started it in January, but you built up a backlog first.
Yeah, that's right. So we are coming up on year 6, believe it or not, Kat, which is crazy.
That is crazy. And having a good time.
Definitely having a good time. One of these days, I'll get my shit together and we'll have some kind of celebration. But
we should do that at the next Worldcon that you and I are both at.
That's a good idea.
Or something like that.
That's a good idea.
We could actually do a party.
Yeah.
I
was going to say, people will have to wait until I get my shit together, and that they're going to have to hold their breath for a really long time for that. But that might be a motivating factor for me. I got to get that dopamine going. That's the way to do it.
There you go. We'd have a good time, and I've done parties at Worldcons before, so we can do it.
That's cool.
Yes, we'll absolutely make this a thing. All right.
Okay.
It's a plan.
Okay. I love it.
Okay.
One more thing before we get to Thomas, I just wanted to mention to everybody, that's all the listeners out there, we are working on the website. I've been chatting with a co-op to help us out. And I think things are definitely moving forward. They're moving forward very slowly. Again, this requires me to have my shit together, which I absolutely do not. And, but we're going through the hoops, a little bit at a time. And so eventually that will happen. This has been like a quest of mine for, I think, multiple years now to get our website fixed up because it's just so out of date. So we're on the path. On the path.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, well, are you ready for our guest?
I am. I'm very excited about him.
Excellent. Okay, well, we'll be right back with Thomas Ha.
Yay!
And we are back. Today we have Thomas Ha. Thomas Ha is a Nebula Ignite, Hugo, Locus, and Shirley Jackson Award-nominated writer of speculative fiction. You can find his work in Clarkesworld Lightspeed Magazine, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, and Weird Horror Magazine, among other publications. That's basically like all of the really, really good ones, in my opinion.
Yeah.
His work has also appeared in the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy and the year's Best Dark Fantasy and Horror. Thomas grew up in Honolulu and, after a decade plus of living in the Northeast, now resides in Los Angeles with his family. Welcome, Thomas.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so happy to have you on. You're a writer I've had my eye on for quite some time now, to be honest with you.
That sounds ominous.
It does, doesn't it?
Lightly stalking, maybe.
Okay. Serial
No,
killer style.
Yes, exactly. You know, I may know your address. Maybe. No. No, I'm a big Clarkesworld reader, honestly, and you know, I saw your work in Clarkesworld, and I'm like, wow, this is awesome. I really like this guy's work, and so I started, you know, finding you wherever you were publishing your stories and reading them, and then of course your collection came out, and I pre-ordered it, and I read it immediately, and it's fantastic.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, you know, it can go either way. Either you get that very excited, happy to talk to you, great, I read your work, or you get the very, you know, dissatisfied customer kind of reaction where people are like, "Oh boy, I don't know about this." So I'm glad. I'm really glad that you enjoyed the work in Clarkesworld. I love Clarkesworld a lot, and you know, obviously, if anyone's listening, you should subscribe to that magazine or any spec fic magazine, really. But that's where a lot of great short fiction stuff is happening. So thanks for reading.
Yeah.
I think a podcast where people just brought on guests and told them how much they disliked their story is so painful to listen to.
Oh, yeah.
And no one would come on it after a while, right?
That's true.
You'd have to disguise it as some other podcast and be like, ah!
Yeah, that'd be weird. Kat, you've probably had to deal with that from time to time with all your publications.
Not with people that dislike my stories, but I have a couple of podcasts every once in a while, which actually one of them I'll go back on anytime, where we will spar about politics because, as you know, I am queen of the SJWs. So
Yeah.
You're on Fox News is what you're saying?
Nothing that exalted.
Yeah,
That'd
right.
be amazing.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, that would be hilarious. I've never been invited to a political podcast, believe it or not. I almost find that hard to believe, considering like we put the politics out front a lot of times. So
Well, the only time it's hit when it's kind of like, you know, that little contingent of very right-wing science fiction and its deep fans.
I know of whom you speak. Oh gosh. Well, Thomas, I wanted to talk to you. Obviously, as I've already said, I very much enjoy your work. I'm really curious, and it's funny that you mentioned that people are kind of can be like, I don't know about this. I kind of your work is kind of bothers me or whatever. But I feel like people who venture into horror land probably run into that more than science fiction and fantasy folks. But you're not just horror either. I mean, most of your stories, I think, lean science fiction. There's probably a couple in here that would be more towards the fantasy side. But I'm very curious what brought you to the crossroads of science fiction and horror, because, you know, that's kind of like its own little niche on its own.
Yeah, no, you know, I wish I could say that there was more intention behind it and that I'm very thoughtful about the way I approach it. But the truth of the matter is it really just depends on what strikes me at the moment and the story I'm trying to tell. So I really like multi-genre work and stuff that plays in between those sorts of boundaries. And a lot of it is probably touching on something I think you were thinking about or were about to say about horror versus sci-fi, which is that, in some realms, especially with horror, for example, I think you are given a little bit more leeway to be ambiguous or to make people uncomfortable or make them discontent. But obviously, sci-fi has a lot of strengths too, with a lot of the things that you can speculate about and think about on a societal level or your own personal life. I think they both have different strengths. And I like the in between because sometimes you can do fun things with people's expectations and it doesn't always work. And some readers are less patient about it or a little more easily frustrated. But that's just part of the game and part of the fun. And when you do find the readers that do like that sort of thing or they really get tickled by a particular type of story, that's the best part of it. And so, I think I don't know about everybody else, but I guess my approach is you really try to write for the idea that you're setting out, and that 1% of the readership or whatever it is that likes it, when it hits, it really hits. And so that's how I go about it. It's less, this is my sci-fi story, I'm going to write this sci-fi. This is my horror story, I'm going to write this horror. I prefer to just kind of let it all bleed together.
Yeah, I like that. And I feel like the science fiction in your story isn't just window dressing, like it's important. I know I've read a few horror sci-fi stories where the sci-fi just seems to be like, just happens to be there. It's not really super important to anything.
Where it's tacked on.
Yeah. Or it's just tacked on. It's like, I'm thinking of one specific book, which I will not mention, where it just happens. And it was okay. It was a totally fine horror story. You know what I mean? But I kept finding myself being pulled out of the story, being like, the science, as far as sci-fi goes, that's not like a good sci-fi. You know what I mean? Or like, what was the point of even doing it here in this instance? This could have been anywhere. You know what I mean? Like the lack of use of the sci-fi environment just kept pulling me out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it needs to be part of the story. I mean, it just absolutely needs to be part of the story. But Thomas, I'm curious, do you have examples or people that you really love to read that you feel border two genres like this?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I honestly think most spec fic writers, and you guys probably know this better than I do and are more well read than I am, but I mean, most spec fic writers are all over the genres anyway, most of the time. So few of us are just one thing. But there are a number of writers, I mean, and I talk about this in every single interview, but it's just the easiest one to go to as an example. But, Gene Wolfe is a writer that I really love.
Yeah.
And one of the hallmarks of his work is, I think, the fact that he plays constantly with expectations between horror and sci-fi and fantasy.
Yeah.
Although, a lot of it does have a dark vein, so that, I think arguably a lot of it could be pushed into the horror level because he writes these multi-layered stories where you think on the surface you are in a sci-fi world or a fantasy world, but there's usually something really messed up going on one or two layers down. And that's an example of the type of writing that excites me, academically, mentally, whatever that word is. It just gets my brain, my neurons firing. And I really enjoy that sort of thing that pushes the limits of, you think you're in a certain setting or you have these expectations for a genre, let's twist it or let's really break it if we can, or push it right to the edge.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, honestly, it goes on and on. I mean, Ursula K. Le Guin, a lot of her stuff too is the mixing of fantasy and sci-fi to me, or science fantasy, whatever it is. And James Tiptree Jr.
Oh yeah.
I know a lot of Alice Sheldon's work is sci-fi, but I mean, it's so horrific that like you just sit there afterwards and stare at the wall after reading one of her stories. So it just goes on and on. It's a huge list, but I really like those writers that mess around with the boundaries like that. Do you guys have any favorites?
Boy, Wolf is absolutely one of my favorites. So, I mean, for sure. But I was just reading Peter Beagle's most recent collections, which is a two-parter. And man, that man can write like nobody's business.
So good.
Oh, just so good. And Swanwick. I think Swanwick is another person who's writing, I think, whatever he's doing, I'm willing to follow him. And of course,
Oh yeah.
Connie Willis is another one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, let's see. I'm trying to think of folks on the border now. I've been reading Premi Muhammad lately,
Oh,
yeah, Beneath the Rising is really, it's like everything.
Yeah.
There's
Excellent.
technology, there's magic. It's categories.
Yeah.
It's categorized as horror, though.
yeah.
Gosh, who else is in the
She's going to come teach for me next year.
Mm-hmm.
awesome?
Creamy is. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Caitlin Kiernan. I don't know if you're all
Oh,
familiar
that's
with her.
awesome.
Oh,
She
yeah.
kind of messes around
Yeah.
between things a lot.
Mhm.
Who wrote The Luminous Dead? Is that Caitlin Kiernan or is that
Oh,
Caitlin,
actually,
another Caitlin something? That's like sci-fi and horror, and it is. Finished that a few months ago, and it was just killer good.
oh, I got that from my mom. I haven't read it yet. Caitlin Starling.
Caitlin Starling, okay.
Yeah, my mom read it and said it was excellent. So
It was top notch. It was really, really good.
yeah, yeah. There's so many these days. I think you're right, Thomas. There's just so many people kind of working between the genres that
Yeah, and I feel
seem
like
hard to name them all.
I know. And I feel like the writer answer to that sort of thing is always like, it's a marketing problem or,
Yeah.
let the readers decide or whatever it is, and you kind of shove off the responsibility. But it's funny to me. I mean, I really do think how it's pitched or set up or marketed can really change how people go into it.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
Uh-huh.
and I think there are pros and cons, right? Like if you set something up as a horror story, on the one hand, you get people who will give you more leeway and will be patient with being uncomfortable, all
Mhm.
that sort of thing. They'll
Mhm.
sit with ambiguity and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But there's also the fun of, I mean, you mentioned reading my stuff in Clarkesworld for the first time, and I've found that at least with Clarkesworld, I mean, they are a strict. If you read their guidelines, they're like, we are a no horror place.
Yes.
We are a no zombie place. They have a long list of things they will not accept. And I do not know to this day how I snuck my way in, but I find that readers, but I think it works a little bit to my advantage because most of the Clarkesworld readers sit down expecting, a little bit more of a straight down the middle sci-fi story, and then it ends
Yeah.
pulling the rug out from under their feet a little bit, and it's more fun in some ways if you weren't
Yeah.
thinking that was going to come your way. So I think you can really use that sort of thing to your advantage sometimes. If you gotta do a marketing thing and you gotta get pigeonholed, you can use it to your advantage sometimes.
That makes me think of I was just rereading your story in Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Cry Carib King, which is just such a wonderful, wild ride of a story, and it's kind of got a Robert Chambers vibe, but also kind of like Stanley Weinbaum's A Martian Odyssey, but subverted, and it just I thought that was so good. But that wasn't it wasn't it was a fantasy story, but it also had all these kind of wonderful horror elements, lurking underneath.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, that one doesn't get talked about a lot. It kind of slips under the radar, so I appreciate that. And that one was actually a sequel story to a sword and sorcery, a new age sorcery story,
Oh.
which was a similar thing. And yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I wasn't thinking Robert Chambers specifically, but I think I was trying to mimic or feel the influence of like a Clark Ashton Smith or something that really kind of mixes up the horror and the sci-fi with the fantasy. So you think you're in this really heavy sword and sorcery world, but then all these elements start to bleed in where you're like, oh, wait a minute. I know what this is, but this is from a different kind of story.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing is always fun for me. So I appreciate that. I'm glad that was enjoyable.
Oh, it's a gorgeous story and people should read it. Yes.
And it's funny you mentioned not being sure how you got in the Clarkesworld. I literally had that as a question because, like I said, I read Clarkesworld fairly regularly, and I know of that policy specifically. And to go back and think about that, how you snuck in there, I just think that says so much about your work, though. That it says a lot about the science fiction elements in your work, right? But it also, I think, overall, to some degree, says Neil read it and was like, I'm going to make an exception to some degree here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do not know. I think I asked him once, like the first time I met him, point blank, I'm like, isn't this a horror story? And I think I think he just kind of said, no, it's multi-genre. It's fine. It's safe. It's good. Don't worry about it. And I try not to question it after that. And I trust his judgment and I appreciate it. I will never, look a gift horse in the mouth. I'm glad that it made it in. But yeah, I still occasionally, I wonder, I'm like, is this too far? And I know other writers know this, and I repeat it constantly on social media or, in forums or whatever to other people, but I still get rejected all the time. It's not like I ever like am perfectly safe and I can do it. So sometimes I'll throw Neil something and I'm like, is this too much? And he goes, he doesn't say it, but he rejects it and he goes, I think this is too much. Like, so you can always hit a wall. It's not like you get away with everything. So he still has judgment and is discerning. And I appreciate that he draws the lines that he does.
You're the definition of up and coming author, I would say. You've been publishing for short stories for about 5 years, right? And you started getting into some of the bigger magazines pretty quickly. Did you spend a lot of time working up to that before?
I've written pretty much my whole life here and there as a hobby for myself and not for anyone else. And so it was always in the background. It was always simmering. I always thought I would try writing eventually and give it a real honest shot. But I went through a whole nother career first where I was an attorney and we were on the East Coast for a while and then the West Coast for a while. And all these twists and turns happened where eventually I became a stay-at-home parent. And it was that time when I was really focused on kids and home and, everything had shifted. That was also when the COVID lockdowns happened and everything really shifted. And I think it was really that isolation, I think, that made me reconsider and think about, well, if I'm going to try to write, maybe this is the time to really focus and give it a shot. And so I guess this is a long roundabout way of saying, like, I had always thought about it and I'd always been trying to build to it, but no time ever seemed right. And then, pretty much around that time is when I said, go for it for real. And then after that, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what's fast or slow. I feel like it's tough. With writing, you look at other writers and like someone always seems to be going faster than you. And like, it never seems like you're on the right path or whatever. So it's really hard to judge. You can never judge objectively. Yeah. But from my perspective, it felt like being not an echo chamber, like an isolation chamber for a while where I didn't know if anything would sell. And even if it sold, I don't know if anyone read it. I didn't know if people would respond until a few years in when eventually it started to build. And I think it might have been Clarkesworld. It might have been a few magazines before Clarkesworld, but eventually I got to a point where I was like, oh, okay, I think I'm finding the people who click with me. And that's really the thing, right? It's not necessarily a place or a story or a tier of professional market or whatever it is. It's finding those people who really click with what you do. And once I found some of those people, I was like, okay, I understand now. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be finding other people who like this sort of thing. And it felt like it went from there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I think, I mean, particularly what you said about, like, it looks like everybody is running faster, or at least a large portion of people are running faster. And it's just, you never know what other people are doing. And there's also this sort of weird time effect where, you can sell a bunch of stories and be appearing all over the place and then suddenly have a lull just because they're kind of like the weird cycles of publishing.
Well, it's like when we had Harry Turtledove on, he had 2 books coming out in a span of 3 months, but one had been written 3 years before and, the other one a year before or something like that, and they just happened to be coming out at the same time. And I can, as a non-writer, but a podcaster, I can completely relate. I mean, especially the whole shouting into the void thing. It's,
oh God, yeah.
Unless you go to a conference or something, or you find that you've been long listed for a Hugo, sometimes you just have no idea if anyone's even listening,
Yeah.
We do get some stats that we can look at, but also, I mean, that does give you some insight, but limited, very limited. And you mentioned COVID too, which I think is interesting. I think for some people, they like to think that COVID was just this period where they went through and they had to stay at home and like it didn't really affect their life much in other ways. I know for me personally, I won't get into the details too much, but I had a lot of like very life-changing things happen because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
How did COVID affect your writing? As you mentioned yourself, you started publishing right in the beginning of COVID, and your whole career has basically taken place either during COVID or in this, what I guess people are calling the post-COVID, era. But so how has that affected your writing?
It's a good question. And it's definitely, it's definitely not post-COVID, post-lockdown, maybe. I know it's still
There you
with
go.
us, and it's it's still a thing we're all going through. So it's tough to assess when you're in it still,
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah.
But this is when I do my annoying thing, and I've done this over and over again in interviews where I'm going to dodge it slightly and like twist the question around to a question I can't answer because I think,
Go for it.
I could talk about how COVID feeds into a lot of the stories and the storytelling directly, but I always tend to avoid concrete answers like that. But I will say, I think starting out writing when something super turbulent like that was happening, and to be very honest, the time we're in now is just as, if not more turbulent, where the status quo is constantly getting disrupted day after day, and you don't know which end is up and what new cliff you're going to drop off when you read a headline every morning. When you're in an environment like that, I think the type of writing that I do is starting to become more and more the norm. And by that, I mean weird fiction and horror, sci-fi, multi-genre blended fiction that is purposefully unsettling is something that people not only tolerate, but I think are seeking out more than they were before. Even in the short span of time that I've been writing, in like 5 years, I think there's been a rise in, I don't know if it's dissatisfaction with the world as it is, or if this general, this gnawing feeling that everyone seems to have, but they can't articulate. But I do think that fiction that maybe doesn't describe it directly, but at least taps into some of that nauseous feeling is becoming more a thing that people are not shying away from. And I can't explain it. I wish I were, a sociologist or something, or I had the long view and I could say why that is. And maybe this is a trend. Maybe this always happens in historically turbulent times. But I do think that writing in that period has been very interesting because I've seen, at least for me, a shift in the readership and what kind of things people are willing to tolerate. I think right before the lockdowns, the stuff that I was reading and trying to write and stuff, it was much more, I don't want to say formulaic. I think that's a little bit patronizing or condescending, but it had more boundaries. It had more rules. People loved categorization. They loved the Brandon Sanderson style of here are how, everything interacts, and I understand the lore and the canon and the MCU connectivity of everything. And now everything is not connected. Everything is discombobulated. And people are much more, at least the people I'm finding, are much more into the free-flowing, David Lynchian, subconscious, raw, id-driven kind of stuff. And that's just been my broad gut feeling as a writer, is that like more people are more mainstream normal readers, I don't know, however you define that, are more open to those ideas than they were before, at least from my perspective.
Oh, that's so interesting.
I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, I think you're seeing also at the same time, you're seeing a couple of other genres pop up. And I think it's fascinating that suddenly we've got cozy everything. And the other kind of strand that I think is really interesting is lit RPG, which is just incredibly popular, just like sort of like all of a sudden over the course of just a few years, I think. I think absolutely people people want horror, and it's strange because we're at a point where back in the olden days, you could go into a bookstore and it actually had a horror section, and they don't do that anymore.
I'm really curious about what you said there, Kat. Like, I get the cozy thing. I definitely see, and I get the connection to the weird fiction immediately as kind of like an opposite, right? But the lit RPG, like, how do you see that fitting in there?
See, lit RPG is weird, and I think it taps into that sort of like, oh, what if we're all in a simulation sort of urge? And it's also people are dropped into a world where if they understand the interface, they can control it in a way that we can't control this world, right? It becomes much more predictable. You do X number of actions and you get experience points and you advance, as opposed to this world where we're not even sure if the government is working or not, right? And so I think that's part of the appeal.
Interesting.
But I could be full of shit too, so.
I mean, it makes sense to me. I have not had the chance to get into any lit RPG yet, so I am looking forward to it. You know, Kat, you've mentioned Matt Diniman a million times, and
Oh yeah, I love his stuff.
yeah,
Well,
go ahead.
I'm working on actually a lit RPG thing with my brother right now. The two of us are co-writing it, but it's also in a game system that unfortunately I cannot disclose yet, but it's one of the RPG games.
Oh, cool.
That's cool.
So that's fun. It's fun.
I want to see a Thomas Hall RPG.
Ooh, there we go. What do you think, Tim?
I don't know if I'm equipped for that. I feel like that would frustrate a lot of people, but I think I heard, maybe I'm mixing this up with someone else, but like Brian Evenson, who's a huge weird fiction writer, I think he might have done some small, I don't know if it's an RPG expansion or something like that, where it was very bizarre and weird. And I heard it was great. I mean, I think people liked it, but maybe I'm mixing him up with another weird fiction writer. So I know it's possible to do it in a way that's exciting for people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Give me 10 years or something. Maybe I'll figure it out.
Well, you know, you mentioned at the back of your book that there are a couple stories that are loosely related, right? And where did I read it? You mentioned somewhere else too about having some stories that are loosely related. It doesn't seem to me like you did that intentionally. Maybe I'm completely wrong. I certainly don't want to put words in your mouth. So I guess that is one question. But also, like, do you intend to like create more continuity in your kind of universe as you move forward, or is this just something that's like sporadically happens? It just, you know.
Yeah, well, so I guess to your first question, it was intentional for those 3 stories for this collection. I think when maybe 2 years ago now, I'm not sure how far back, I didn't think I was circling around a bunch of themes that would eventually work for a collection. And I wanted there to be either a frame or a backbone or a through line for it that sort of summed up some of the ideas or the things that I was thinking about in a lot of these stories, because there was a lot of thematic echo between the different stories and recurring symbolism and imagery. So I just wanted to take some of that and make 2 or 3 stories that, from my perspective at least, wrapped it up to some degree. So, but because I like ambiguity and I like leaving things open, I didn't want there to be strict continuity where it's like, this character is this character, but 20 years apart, or this world goes through this trauma and this is how it ends up like that. So I purposefully, and I went through a discussion back and forth with Undertow Publications, which is a great indie publisher who ran this collection or put this together, and Michael Kelly, who runs it, who's fantastic. And we had conversations about, how explicit do we be about, or should we be about the connectivity? And eventually I think we settled on, I will just mention it in the back of the book so that if people care enough about it or they're really frustrated, they don't spin their wheels too long and they can look at it and say, oh, okay, well, so at least these 3 are connected. And those characters who pop up again and maybe have similar descriptions and dialogue and other things, that they are meant to echo each other in a purposeful way. It's not accidental or haphazard. So that's the answer to that part. Yes, it's intentional. But to your other question about is that something I do in my work in general? I would say sometimes. I think and again, this is similar to my approach with the afterword in the collection. I have a section on like my website where, if people care to dig around, they can find what stories are related to others. And sometimes they are, it's a spectrum. Sometimes they are actually very much related. Like it's the same universe. It's the same, Kat mentioned Cry the Carib King is very much a sequel, a direct sequel with the same characters, same world as St. Fario's Feast, which was a New Age sword and sorcery. And there are a bunch of sci-fi ones. Clarkesworld has one, Sweet Baby. It has a number of stories that take place in the same sort of star system. But for the most part, a lot of them are like the collection where it's thematic echoing.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to do this thing where I like to lean into what I view as the strength of short fiction, which is the freedom to iterate and the way you can, within a short span of time, play with the exact same elements over and over again. And sometimes you can do it like 90% the same, but maybe you want the ending to come out a little differently, or the character to have a little more fortitude or a different set of characteristics. And you can see how that plays out instead. And I find that way more interesting sometimes when you do it within short fiction, because you can lean into certain things that you can in other forms of storytelling. Like, someone who I think does this really well, I think about a lot, is Haruki Murakami, for example, where he's known for his novels, but I think I shouldn't say much better. I think he's an incredibly amazing short fiction writer. And the thing about him is, once you've read half a dozen or a dozen Murakami short stories, he has a pattern and archetypes that he goes to again and again and again and again. And rather than being repetitive, it ends up being fascinating because he tweaks things and you see it play out in all these different ways. And that's such a cool idea to me. So a lot of stories, both in the collection and in my other work, I think I try to like have little mini arcs or little clusters of themes of stories where, maybe this is about parenthood, or this is about, I don't know, trying to reach a point of self-actualization and confront indecision or whatever it is. And certain characters will succeed, certain characters will fail, but you get to kind of see the different ways it plays out. And I like that kind of thematic loose continuity rather than, again, the, this guy moved to this planet 1 year later and this is the next story, that sort of thing. But there are a lot of different approaches.
You had mentioned some of the themes that you put within your work, and one of the main themes that really jumped out to me is family. There's so many kids and families in your stories. Can you talk about how family has influenced your writing and why it's so at the forefront of a lot of your writing?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a couple of things for me. One thing is just a very literal, direct translation of whatever's going on in my life. I still have, my kids are young. They're a lot of my focus a lot of the time, and that's what I'm doing when I'm not writing. So I have no doubt that that's why it bleeds into the story so much, is probably the main explanation. But I think the other reason I focus on family and home and all these things so much is I'm very fixated, at least right now. And I think as time changes and I get older, move on from these things. But given a lot of things that have happened, especially in the last decade, I am very interested in the way people make their decisions and their choices and the things that prevent them from acting in certain ways. And so I think there's a reason why a lot of these stories end up focusing on nuclear families and middle-class coded characters and suburb type scenarios, is because, I think a lot of those types of characters, how do I put this in a way that doesn't sound super aggressive or offensive to people who live in these environments? But I think it's a common thing where a lot of people struggle with making certain choices because they are afraid, and they're afraid of taking certain risks and jeopardizing their safety, their comfort, their, material stability. And I think that impulse, it's really like a pain aversion impulse, right? And sometimes people will do the most bizarre things to avoid pain, even if it means avoiding all pleasure, even if it means never improving their situation. People will bend over backwards to not face certain discomfort. And I think that that's most prevalent in a certain kind of environment, family environment, where you're trying to preserve something and some things just can't be preserved. And there are threats and there are changes and external forces constantly jeopardizing that impulse to preserve the status quo. And I think that the back and forth, that tension is one of the most fascinating things that drives a lot of people that I've just, have seen and observed in my lifetime. So I'm trying, I know this is very vague and I'm keeping it very high level because I don't want to like put any individual person on the spot and like accuse them of not making a right decision. But like, if you look at our politics, you look at our country, you look at this environment that we're in, a lot of it is people avoiding discomfort and the bizarre, terrible things that leads to. And I think that's why it comes up over and over again.
I'm thinking about that because I was just thinking about the idea of people avoiding discomfort because it's really true. And I just recently read, it's a book by Ann Leckie that's coming out next year called Radiant Star. And it is about people doing bad things. And they're not doing it because they're like, ooh, I'm a villain. But they're doing it because they're just sort of crappy beings that are trying to maintain their own comfort. And I hadn't thought of it in terms of comfort at all. So I'm really struck by that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very true. I love that. I don't have a question. I'm still mulling here. Go ahead, Alan. Thomas has been Alan has been so excited about getting you here. I mean, I'm excited, but I just want you to know Alan is like really excited. So go ahead.
Well, it's interesting that you say that though, Kat, because kind of picked up on that a little bit in Premi's work too, Premi Muhammad's work. I mentioned at the top of the podcast, I was reading Beneath the Rising, and like a lot of the bad guys in that book are just they're just arrogant, or they're they're not like mustache twirling bad guys. They're just like I'm lazy, or you know what I mean. Like there's
and that's I think the really interesting narratives show us the monsters, but also show us how they became monsters and how we could become monsters.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's different.
Right.
And there is always a place for stark villains and heroes and all that stuff. And especially in this time that we're living in, it's like every terrible villain you can imagine is probably not Looney Tunes enough or intense enough compared to what we're seeing. It's all like subtle compared to what we're actually living through. But,
right.
I do think the most compelling fiction for me, and I'm not saying I pull this off. I'm not like trying to say that like, this is what I do, but I always like it when writing is not super prescriptive and straightforward and like they are evil because X, Y, and Z. I think it is much more fruitful to be descriptive and try to approach it from a, not a value judgment of like, well, this character is clearly in the wrong because of this. I think it's better when you paint the scenario and you have a strong idea of their characteristics and their values, and you see how it plays out, and the reader comes to the reader's intuition and their gut about how they feel about things is always way better and way stronger, and they'll define it for you. I think it works better if the reader does it than the author saying like, and that's why these people are shitty. Like this is why they're terrible. It almost never works if you do a message-driven story or piece that way.
Yeah.
So, even I'm just like trying to think about the collection. I mean, there are some villains in here, but even some of them, I never, I try never to go to the point where you're sympathizing or you necessarily are like, oh, well, this abusive person is okay. Like, I think that's also a problem in some fiction where you clean your hands and you give the bad characters a way out. I think that's not good either. But I'm just thinking randomly of certain stories like Sweet Baby, for example, which is about a dysfunctional family
Yes. That would be my example as well. I was just about to say that. Go ahead.
Right. Yeah. No, I was thinking that because we're talking about Clarkesworld, and was that the first one? That might have been the first story that Neil took. And that's one about, this is going back to everything that we were just talking about, but like a nuclear family where there is dysfunction, where there are parents that are trying to preserve a certain relationship dynamic and a status quo. And I think by the end of the story, you have a better understanding of why they make certain choices the way that they do. But I don't think, and I could be wrong, I've not heard this from readers. I don't think readers typically walk away being like, well, and they're okay, or like, and I understand, and therefore it's fine. I think you still have a feeling that they are not necessarily making choices that are, let's say, healthy for their children or the protagonist. So I think there's a way to do it where you don't necessarily forgive your villains either, but I think it's better when you just sort of put all the pieces out on the table and then the reader says, yeah, I don't think that's the right way to do it. Here's how I would do it. And they think about that for themselves. They get to reflect on it.
Yeah. No, I think that's the perfect example. I mean, and it's because you're not sure though, because you don't know the full context. So, I mean, you still know that the parents aren't great, right? You know that the dad's an alcoholic, right? That's alluded to. It's not like a main point of the story or anything, right?
You
But
are
also,
like one of the only people who've picked up on that particular piece, but yeah,
really,
that's right. Yeah.
huh.
Yeah, a lot of people gloss over that. I mean, that's one of the details that I don't usually hear from people. So it's interesting that you got that.
And they make these really weird decisions, right? But again, you don't know the context either. You know almost nothing, right? You know as much as the kid does, as the girl does, which is not a lot because they've been intentionally hiding things from her, and also the world is just so strange,
Yeah.
You could imagine anything happening, really.
Yeah, and that's something, I mean, I struggle with it, and it depends on the story. Some stories are much more straightforward and I spell it out, or it's like a trope or a type of mechanic or world that you've seen a million times in other science fiction or horror, so you get it. But I do think there are some stories where the ambiguity is better to preserve. And while I have my own idea of how it operates, if it doesn't affect the characters or if it doesn't say something to the themes that I'm hoping to approach, I think it's better to leave it open.
Mm-hmm.
But, it doesn't work for every story. It just depends.
I'm curious for you to talk about that a little bit more. You're very good at leaving out information, withholding some of that context and those details or obscuring it, which really adds to the, otherworldliness maybe of the stories that you build. How do you decide what to leave out?
That's a really good question. I'm still figuring it out. So I don't know the right answer, and every story is different, and my approach keeps changing every month, every year. But it's a battle, I think, and sometimes that's when it's good. It's good to have an editor who has an idea of what they're trying to accomplish for their magazine or their story as well. I mean, I'm probably of the school that's closer to like the author needs to preserve their idea, and who cares, like if a reader gets it, they get it. If they don't, they don't. But it's a bit of a selfish way of thinking, to be honest. Like if you just do what's fun for you and you withhold all the time, that can be very dissatisfying for a lot of people. So for some stories, it's really a little bit of a back and forth with an editor who will flesh things out. I think Neil is kind of that way. I'll be honest, he actually lets me preserve a lot of the ambiguity. But he'll have really thoughtful questions about, well, if this is the way this device works or this mechanic, shouldn't this also happen? And he'll push a little bit about explaining some of the mechanics here and there. And then you've got other people who I'm just like off the top of my head. I mean, they're all fantastic editors. There's Morris Allen at Metaphorosis magazine, which has since shut down. They're still a publishing imprint, but they don't do their magazine anymore. But he's a guy I always think about because he was one of the first editors I worked with who very much is at the opposite end of the spectrum. He would always be like, I need this spelled out. And, like, what is the mechanic of this magic or this science or whatever it is. And we would kind of negotiate or compromise and reach a point where a little bit more was built out in the story so that a reader could understand. But I think it really, really depends on what the emotion or the experience you're going for in the story is. So, I mean, I'm just trying to think of a lot of the ones in Uncertain Suns are very purposefully open-ended and ambiguous, but there are some that are like palate cleansers in there that are purposefully a little bit different. So like Where the Old Neighbors Go, which is, I mean, that was a Metaphorosis magazine story now that I think about it, with Morris Allen, where he was much more about emphasizing, well, when you make this circle, how does this operate? How does this hurt the, demonic entity or whatever it is? And I probably ended up spelling it out more than I would have otherwise. I would have probably left it very, very shrouded in ambiguity. But that story ends up being some people's favorite. I mean, some people who like more conventional setup, twist, climax stories, that is much better. And I see why. So it can depend. And I know I'm going on very long when I could have answered this in like one sentence.
No
but
worries.
I think a good editor is the one who can help you sometimes figure out when to be more explanatory and when to just hide it all. But to be honest, if it were all up to me and no one was censoring me, I would be frustratingly vague. It would be almost incoherent, and I think most people would probably not pick it up.
That's hilarious. Don't feel bad about long answers. The hardest interviews are the ones where the interviewee gives us one sentence, and by the end, I'm struggling to think of things to say of like, oh my God.
Or
what's
one
next?
word. Just like, yep. Just like, come on.
It's like, no, not yep. Oh, I will say one other thing too, is earlier we were talking about kids and family, and I wanted to say I really like the way that you write your children, because they're like, I think I want to say they're fully embodied, like they're people. I feel like a lot of writers make children very two-dimensional. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
And some,
Yeah.
a lot of your main characters are children, and they're smart children, or they understand more than you think they do, which I think is the reality of children. They have nuance, and they're actual people. So I just want to say I really appreciate that fact about your writing.
Thanks. No, I'm glad. I actually don't know why. I've been thinking about this. I don't know why so many of the stories are kid folk. I mean, I know why they're kid focused, but why the main characters often end up being kids, I'm not sure. I just end up gravitating to those stories. But I do think that, and I've said this elsewhere, but I do think that kid characters as POV characters, they are very good devices of moral clarity and very good at. I mean, the stereotype you typically run into, I think, in SFF and especially horror is that like kids are evil and they're sadistic and and that can be true to a degree if you like turn up certain aspects, sociopathic elements about them. They can be pretty wild. I'm not going to like pretend that they aren't like rough sometimes, but honestly, most of the time, kids have a really developed sense of moral clarity and simplistic and they don't have all the baggage and context that adults have, but they do have a sense of like, well, why aren't we doing this or that if that's the right thing? And that's their impulse. Usually, for the first impulse is to be kind and to help people, and that can be a very interesting approach. I mean, and this is the first time I'm saying this, I'm just kind of like thinking about it out loud, but I mean, I write such disturbing, dark stuff in the world because I think that's what I feel about the world that I live in. But there's something about a character of a little bit moral clarity to carry you through that makes it manageable and bearable. And I think that's probably the way I feel about my family and in real life, is that there are these core things that survive or endure that are innate in people. And I think that can be a real propulsive element in storytelling. You want to see what kid will do in a certain scenario. And On the flip side of that, I mean, this is not to say that kids are evil or sadistic or bad, but they can also help you make people uncomfortable too, because kids also just go along with a lot of terrible things because they don't know any better and they inherit a terrible world that we give them. And so in a story like Window Boy or Balloon Season or whatever, where there are kid characters walking around, they just assume that the world has always been this terrible and that there are always horrific things out there because that's the world that they know. And sometimes that is useful to make readers uncomfortable as well, not just like make them want to read, but also make them alarmed because kids aren't, they're walking into danger, or they are potentially going to, in the case of like a Window Boy, maybe, open their house up to an element that could be hostile to them. And it makes people nervous. So it can cut both ways. And I'm always just interested in how, I don't know, people react to kid characters very differently than they do to adult characters, I think.
Well, I think it also, one of the things I've noticed is people that have children react differently to children in peril than people who don't have children, kind of like generally speaking.
Well,
I think it is. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that's probably true.
Yeah, I think so too. Thomas, tell me if you had this reaction when your kids were born. When my kids were born, I could not watch violent horror or read anything super violent, basically, for like 3 years. Like, I just couldn't, like, I'd be like, but that's somebody's kid. And I just couldn't do it, you know? Did you have a similar reaction?
You can't see me. I'm nodding along in my house saying, yep, that's exactly right. I think I'm out of that period now, finally. But I do think for a long time after my kids were born, just putting myself in the mental space of something like that happening, I just couldn't deal with it for a while, which is funny because before that, never bothered me. I mean, I didn't love it, but it was like an intellectual exercise if kids were getting killed in some media or whatever, and it didn't bother me. But then once the thought of that of actually occurring in your life, became a possibility, then it became much harder for a while to read anything like that. So even now, now that I'm out of it, I can sort of put myself in that space. I still try to be judicious about when that's an element in a story. I just try not to do it too lightly because for some reason it just feels a little bit too. It also feels a little schlocky or a little exploitative. Like here's this terrible thing. Didn't that get you? Oh, how sick is that?
Yeah.
And I just don't want to go there if I don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it should be treated seriously. I mean, and I'm like you, I'm past most of that, but I'll never forget we were at the 2018 Nebulas and some younger writer was saying, and then I'm going to kill this baby in the story. And I was like, you might want to really think about that and take that seriously because there are a lot of people who will not read your book because of that. I'm just telling you.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I'm definitely I'm not one of those like I'm not one of those like there are boundaries and like you can never do X, Y, or Z. But I do think there are some areas where like if you're gonna do it, just you gotta like think about why you're doing it and like what impact you want to have, and you don't just traipse in and just do it willy nilly.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you do want to. Like you talked about finding your readers, and your readers may be okay with that, but some of them may not, right? And so they may get severely discomforted by your fiction, which some might be a good thing, right? I mean, art is supposed to disturb and unsettle.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes that's what you got to go for, and if that's the idea, that's the idea. But, everyone's different. And again, it just depends on the story for me.
Yeah. That's totally fair. That's totally fair. I think my advice to them was just like, just consider it and, be intentional, I guess, was probably my advice, be intentional about whatever it is that you do there.
Right.
Your monsters I have found to be really interesting. You don't do the Lovecraft thing of like, oh, it was so horrible, but then not describe it. You just definitely describe your monsters. at least some of the monster, maybe sometimes not all the details, but they also seem to be like, I don't know, that they seem like they come from a similar place. The thing that they reminded me of is, have you ever seen the old Disney cartoons from like the 40s, like the Halloween ones where they have like the, I don't know what you would call them, like chimeric type of monsters, you know? That's kind of what they remind me of.
Mm.
So, like, where do you get your monsters from, I guess, is my question.
Yeah. It ranges. I think sometimes it is very direct. Like, I think a lot of them tend to be animal based. So I can see the chimeric sort of like old cartoon aspects to them. I do think, I grew up in Hawaii, and so I fear, I'm such an indoor kid and like a nerd, and Hawaii is such a beautiful outdoorsy place. But when you are pasty book reading kid like I am, like everything terrifies you. So, I mean, the ocean is one of the most terrifying things that I can think of. So, a lot of things that I do tend to be sort of oceanic or ocean based. There's like Portuguese man o' war, which are the most alien looking things you'll ever come across. And we get blooms of them. They're like bright blue, and they look like balloons with little tentacles. They're not related to jellyfish, I don't think. They're actually distinct. And they're these colony organisms that are so bizarre, and they hurt you. And so you never want to touch them, but you run across them and they look like little like cotton candy things on the beach. And something about that has just never left my brain. So a lot of the creatures, I mean, balloon season obviously is one of the main ones, but even in the final story, Uncertain Suns, which is this very bizarre colony organism ecosystem, like a lot of that is like, siphonophoric, whatever based kind of things that have this kind of fungal, but just not mammalian at all feel to them. So I think a lot of it is just this gut traumatized childhood stuff that's not left me. And then I think part of it also too is just from the writing aspect of it. I think it is, I don't go full Lovecraft, you're right, where it's like, oh, you cannot comprehend it, so I won't even try, like it's up in the air. But I actually do leave a lot of details out. And it was funny, I was just talking to I got the chance to talk to a group of students who had read the book. And it was funny seeing how people insert details all the time where they like think that you described it a certain way. They start talking about it like, oh, you said it's red and it has this and that. And I go, actually, I didn't use color. I didn't use this, maybe texture or whatever. And you find that people insert a lot of imagery from their own traumas and their fears instinctually and automatically. And that's way more potent than you diving into very explicit, gory detail oftentimes. I think, especially for horror, the things that people have inside their brain and they unlock themselves is way more terrifying than you trying to paint a very explicit picture. And sometimes trying to paint that explicit picture is goofy and cartoonish if you go too far, for me at least. So that's an area where less detail is more, I think. And a lot of times people will fuel their own nightmares with whatever's in their head.
That's awesome. I think you do a great job of that. Kat, do you have any final questions before we start wrapping up?
No, I just, you've given me so much to think about that I'm actually just sitting here musing over things. But it's been a delight, Thomas. It is, you said it's hard to kind of figure out where you are, but from my perspective, I think you're doing really well, and you are doing amazing things, and getting on the award ballots as you should. And I think that's amazing. I mean, you're just keep it up, I guess is what I want to say.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I just, you never know. We were talking about at the very beginning of this episode about like publication cycles and things getting stretched out. And I come from a background, as an attorney, you're risk averse and predictability and order is everything. But this business is like the exact opposite, where like you never know. It's like feast or famine. and like things go well 1 minute and then totally plateau or drop off the next. So as long as things are still going and stories are getting out there, I think I will count that as a win.
Awesome.
Well, okay, final questions then. The big question, what is bringing you hope right now?
Oh gosh. Oh, right now.
Probably should have warned you about that one, huh?
I guess I don't know. I think people have lived through worse, I think is what I always come back to. And that's what I love about horror writing, and especially reading other horror writers. There are echoes of stuff. Like, people have gone through versions of what we're going through, and people have survived. And I think about that all the time. And that's really what carries me through, is like the world continues on in some form or fashion. So whatever terrible thing is happening today, it will pass at some point.
That's lovely.
Definitely. What else are you working on that people should know about?
I am, you get this question all the time, especially from like relatives and like family friends and stuff, like, oh, are you working on a novel? Like, that's always the question.
Yeah.
If you're a short fiction writer, I think you get asked, but I am not. I love short fiction, and I hope to continue just writing short stories day after day and get as many of those published as I can.
Awesome.
I mean, as a huge short fiction fan, I appreciate that. So glad to hear it. And where can people find you online?
You can find me at thomashawwrites.com. That's usually where the big announcements come, and my bibliography is, all my stories. And I think I mentioned, there are other pages where you can see how they're related if you like, and things like that. But honestly, I'm mostly on Blue Sky, just shit posting, almost never talking about anything serious. Don't read into my social media and assume that that's how I write, because it's nothing like that. But yeah, that's usually where I live online.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, and that was our conversation with Thomas Haw. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to share us with your friends on Facebook or Twitter. You can always rate and review us. And if you really want to support us monetarily, you can find us on patreon.com/ifthisgoeson. We would greatly appreciate that, especially in this day and age when everything is so unsure. But if you can't, we understand as well. So if you just want to give us a one-time donation, you could also find us at Ko-fi, that's Kofi, and just, type in "If This Goes On," and we will pop up. We're right there. So I think that's enough of that. Kat, thoughts, opinions, musings?
That was a really good conversation. It's always interesting to talk to people about short fiction, because I love short fiction, and I think most of the people we have are novelists. So it kind of very refreshing to have somebody go like, nope, short fiction, that's it. And
I love that too.
It just said really smart things.
Yeah, he did. I do like to work in some short fiction writers here and there. I always worry, like, 'cause I'm such a short fiction reader, right? And I know a lot of people are not. So I always worry that, like, everyone's gonna be like, oh, yeah, okay, short fiction,
Well, I think short fiction needs some people proselytizing for it. So if you're a listener and you're like, oh, short fiction, well, go check out one of Thomas Haw's short stories and see what you think, because you might be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, you can go and listen to the Clarkesworld ones for free, literally for free.
Nice.
The only thing it will cost you is the time it takes to listen to it, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you reading these days, Kat?
I'm actually reading right now a book by Junji Ito called The Uncanny. And he's the manga artist, the Japanese manga artist. And it's really interesting because it's also done in the form of a graphic novel rather than a book. And so I am loving that and sort of doling it out in small chunks.
Is he the one who does like the spirally things?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Paul Jessup really likes him. I have not read him yet.
Oh, he's really worth looking at, I think. And it's always interesting to hear comic book artists talk, because they're doing both the textual stuff and the visual stuff, and it's just a really
Mhm.
interesting combination.
Yeah. Yeah, totally, totally.
So what are you reading?
Yeah, well, that brings me on to my list. So I'll start with comics
Mhm.
first since you brought up comics.
Huh?
I started reading Swamp Thing. I have read all
Oh, so
Yep,
good.
I've read
Okay.
everything up to Alan Moore, and I have read the first 2 issues that Alan Moore wrote.
Oh, my friend, you have such pleasures ahead of you. My God.
I know, I'm trying to do the same thing that you're doing, and I'm trying to dole it out slowly because how can I say this? Like, like just thinking historically, Swamp Thing came out in the mid-70s. It was very pulpy,
Mhm, mhm,
a very
mhm.
horror movie kind of, thing going on there.
Yeah.
And then it ended and got like kind of like pulpy
Mhm.
superhero-y at the end, which I was not a huge fan of.
No,
And
no.
then they started again in the 80s, right? And it kind of picked up in that same way, but was by that point I felt it was kind of tired, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And then reading the first 2 issues that Moore wrote, it's just like it's it's weird to have like the exact same characters and the exact same artist, but a different writer and just how much it changes is amazing.
Oh, and it's so different.
So
It's
different.
so different, and that is one of, I think, possibly the greatest issue of all time, which you will know when you come to it. It's the Pogo issue, which just like every time I read it, it just wrecks me.
Wow.
Just absolutely wrecks me. Yeah.
Awesome. 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 So that's been exciting. I didn't think about this until right at the end and we had passed the topic, but Uncertain Suns, the last story in Thomas Hawes' collection, reminded me a lot of Swamp Thing. And in fact,
Oh, yeah.
a lot of the monsters in there remind me of the monsters drawn in the earlier Swamp Thing.
Oh, we should have asked him about. We'll have to have him back at some point and ask him about
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish I'd thought of that in a more timely
There you
manner. Come on, brain. I'm also reading Absolute Wonder Woman. Have you read that yet?
Is that the, Gail Simone one? Or
No.
no?
I don't know who's writing. She I looked her up and I can't remember her name right now. She wrote some Birds of Prey, I think, like Gail
Oh,
Simone actually. I think she
okay.
wrote some
Maybe that's,
Harlequin, but oh my god, Absolute Wonder Woman?
I would have to look, 'cause I really enjoy Wonder Woman, so, yeah.
Absolute Wonder Woman is amazing. I
Okay.
know we talked about Absolute Martian Manhunter, which I also think is amazing, but Absolute Wonder Woman is just oh my god, so good. And the art is amazing.
Okay.
The writing is amazing. I just love
Ooh.
I do love Wonder Woman as the character, but the way that she does Wonder Woman is
Yeah.
fantastic. I just yes.
Awesome.
Let's see. Now, book-wise, I am currently reading The Library at Mount Char, which a million people have recommended to me over the years. Wow, weird. Like sort of fantasy, sort of horror. I'm really think I'm 3 chapters into it, but the chapters are long. They're not short chapters.
Okay.
So weird. Have you read that one?
I don't think so.
I've heard so many people recommend it that I finally started reading it and wow, so weird. It's good. It's good though. It's weird.
Uh-huh.
And then of course, I already mentioned this episode that I've been reading Beneath the Rising by Premi Muhammad and so good.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
It's funny, I feel like there's this subgenre of horror now that could just be marketed as kind of like adventure horror or something like that. And hers to me falls right into it, right? Like
Hmm.
you've got that cosmic horror, of course, you know what I mean? That's advertised all over the book, you know what I mean? But there's like this total sense of
Uh-huh.
adventure
Mhm.
going
Mhm.
on where,
Yeah.
the characters, and this isn't a spoiler, I mean, it's like literally on the back of the book, they end up traveling all over the place and like you know, they like go to Morocco and then some, you know, Carthage, and then I don't know where else they go, you know, all these places, you know. So there's
Yeah.
this whole like element of like trying to escape the authorities and like all this other thing, you know what I mean? That's and like these weird like magical societies that, you know, while they're kind of cryptic and there definitely is like a malevolent feel to them, they're not like,
Yeah.
oh, we wear skin masks or anything. You know what I mean?
Right, right, right. Yes.
So that's also been super enjoyable.
Nice.
Well, thanks to everybody for listening. As always, it is greatly appreciated, and we are bringing you hope one episode at a time. If This Goes On, Don't Panic is edited and produced by Alan Bailey. Our theme music is by Father Flamethrower. Additional music is by Christopher Snydrowski, and outro music by Sable Aradia. Intro by Dave Robinson. A special thanks to our guest, Thomas Ha. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll see you again soon.
But one thing I don't believe in, letting